What is temperance? Is temperance the same as moderation? Well, moderation, how I understand it, is, here's an example. People say they drink coffee in small amounts, so they use coffee in moderation. And they say they use sugar just now and then, so they say they use sugar in moderation. But is temperance the same as moderation? The answer is no. Temperance for me means saying no to things that are unhealthy for you. So, like, if somebody gives me or offers me a chocolate, then I'll say, no thank you. That means temperance. The very first place in the Bible where temperance began was in the beginning, when Adam and Eve had a choice to choose between what was right and what they had to say no to. 1 Peter 5 verse 8 tells us what the devil is trying to do with us. Be sober and vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. This verse is warning us to be sober and vigilant. That means using your frontal lobe. And the difference between your frontal lobe and your limbic system is, I'm quickly going to give 2 examples. So what needs to be the boss? Your mouth or your brain? Your brain. And your limbic system sits just underneath your frontal lobe. So what needs to be the boss? Frontal lobe or limbic system? So do you see how it's like a puzzle? What's at the whole top is the boss of what's at the bottom. The frontal lobe decides what is best for us and figures out what we need the most. The limbic system just wants something, and the limbic system just wants to feel good. In the book of Titus, in the 2nd chapter, we read that old and young people have to be sober-minded and temperance, because if you don't have temperance, then you aren't sober-minded. In other words, if you don't say no to things that are bad for you, then you can't have a sober mind. Galatians 5 verse 22 and 23 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control." Self-control is the same as temperance. And when people say, "Oh, I just can't help myself," it actually means they don't have self-control. They don't have temperance. And that actually means they don't have the fruit of the Spirit. But that might sound a bit ugly. So I'm going to say with that the Holy Spirit wants us to use the fruit of the Spirit as like a routine to keep us sober-minded. Jesus is inviting us to follow his example, and he prayed to the Holy Spirit to help him to do the right thing. In the very next verse after the fruit of the Spirit, it says this, "And those who are Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires." So what does that mean? That means that those who are Christ's have laid down all the I want things and laid down their limbic system, in other words, and took up their frontal lobe with the fruit of the Spirit. I am trying to practice temperance every single day. In the day when people give me snacks or food that I know is unhealthy, I say no to them. And that makes me or helps me to exercise my frontal lobe, not my limbic system. So why do we have a limbic system? The limbic system tells us when we're too cold, too hot, hungry or thirsty. But it should never be the boss. Like a school teacher, we have the headmaster and the school teacher. The frontal lobe is the headmaster and the limbic system is the school teacher. The frontal lobe should always be the boss. And also, the Holy Spirit can only talk to us through the frontal lobe. I would like to invite you to write down the New Start word with the letters going down, which is nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, trust in God, or trust in Jesus. And after you ate a nice big breakfast, tear out the end. And after you went for a walk in the garden or went to play with the dogs or did something in the garden, then you tear out exercise or tear out the E. And every one that you do, you tear out. And I would also like to invite you to share your comments and share the video with other friends and family. Just remember that every time you say no to something that you know is unhealthy for you or not good for you, then you're strengthening your frontal lobe and exercising your temperance. Bye-bye, and I hope you remember everything.